Welcome to Mediocre Gaming, and today we're playing The Division 2. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and salutations. Today, state of the game. Let's get to it. By now, you have found the expeditions and the two main missions, White Oak and the Zoo, Manning Zoo, as additions in Episode 1. Now, at this point, the expeditions are gone. You no longer have access to the expeditions to Kenley College. And what does this mean? This means that you no longer have access to the exotic rifle, the Diamondback. So if you did go through all three sections of the expedition and unlock the final crypt that gave you the exotic, then good for you. If you have not, then you will have to wait for it to swing back around in order to get it. Now, after you unlock it the first time, you will be able to get it as a random drop from any heroic boss. Now, knowing what we do now about the expeditions, it would have been helpful if the developers had been a little bit more transparent about what is going on with the expeditions. They didn't say anything about the time-gated factor of the expeditions, where you could only do the one section of the expedition out of the three initially, and then the other one unlocked after a certain amount of time, and then the third one unlocked last, and then you had a short window of opportunity in order to finish that third expedition and get the guaranteed exotic reward at the end. Now, if you did not get it, it will come back and you will have an opportunity to get it. Now, how much time, they actually have not said. So if you didn't have an opportunity, or you didn't know that this was a time-gated event or limited, then yeah, I mean, I can understand being upset about it. So currently, I think Division 2 is in that 1.3 stage, similar to how the Division was. So if you don't know, Division at update 1.3 added the Underground. The Underground was not well received, and the players were kind of getting bored with the content that they already had. So the DLC that came out was not up to expectations, and the current grind, the current mode was not as exciting because it was the same old. So there were a lot of players that left the Division for a extended period of time until that was addressed. And I think that is where the Division 2 is right now. I think the current missions in the game are still worthwhile, but people that have been doing it since the game was released are maybe getting a little bit of fatigue as far as that goes. Yes, you still have the Dark Zone. Yes, there are some tweaks and some new things here and there, but more or less it is the same thing that has already been since the game released. When the raid came out, people soon realized that you needed a full-on DPS build in order to progress, and the consoles were at a severe disadvantage compared to PC players. So PC players had an advantage. They were able to go through and get to the end of the raid and get their rewards. Console players, I think, are still struggling in some respects and have a more difficult time. Now, if you have a pre-made team, it is probably a little bit easier because you have some experience with them and you know what they're capable of and what they're going to be doing. You know, they're going to have your back, you're going to have their back, there's going to be communication, you're going to know what's going on. They already know what to expect and what to do at each stage. And so I'm not saying that you can't complete the raid if you're on the console. I'm going to say it is more difficult, and even more so if you're doing it with a not a pre-made team, if you're doing it with randoms, if you're doing an LFG, if you're looking for a group and you're getting a group online, people that you've never played with before, it is going to be more difficult. And of course, if those players don't have a correct build, it is going to be even more so. And since everyone needs to have a DPS build, and you say, wait, what about the new skill builds? Because skill builds are more pertinent now, more relevant to the game than what it was previously. yes, you can use a skill build. I think it is possible to get through the raid with all or any skill builds. However, skill builds require more precision than DPS, if that makes any sense. And what I mean by that is when you have a boss that has a small window of opportunity for a damage phase, skill builds need to be able to take advantage of the maximum amount of time of that window that window provides. So having that communication saying, I'm going to take them down, and as soon as you hear that, you need to have your skills out, ready to go, depending on what it is, have it positioned correctly, and have it ready to do damage. So not only do you have your skills ready to go, doing damage, you need to be ready to go to be able to do that additional damage on top of it. So yes, there are things to do. There are new things to do because there are 2 new main missions to do. And of course, you can respec your guy and have an additional loadout that is a skill build, knowing that full well that DPS is still the meta. Now, if you already have all of your blueprints, there really isn't a reason to do some of the activities that are there. If you've not gotten all your blueprints and you're still interested in playing, then you can go and get those control points up to level 3 or level 4, and then take out the boss, open up the box, and then you'll get one of the blueprints that you're missing. And they've said that all of the blueprints can be had from those level 3 and level 4 control points. So if you don't have any, you can go through and do the control points and get all of them. You can get some of the blueprints from vendors. You can get some of the blueprints from the projects, daily and weekly projects that reward blueprints. Now, moving forward, I think that the developers need to do something in order to draw more interest, not only of the current players, but of players that are still kind of interested, but haven't necessarily been playing on a regular basis. So they need that activity like that survival from Division 1. And if you recall, they did tweak the Underground to make it more accessible, but also more interesting to play. What they added was they added hunters to the Underground, and the hunters were based on the number of hunters were based on the number of players. So if you were going in by yourself, you would have 2 hunters. If you had a full team of 4, you would have 5 hunters. And it made it more interesting because you never really knew if they were going to show up or where, because it was a random encounter and it would happen one time. So they need to either tweak existing modes or one of the new DLCs have something that draws interest to it. And I'm not saying it has to be survival, although I think there are a lot of fans that would be interested in seeing a new version of survival come back to Division 2. In addition, I think that the apparel cash events are a nice bonus on top of things that you're already doing, but not instead of other things, if you catch my meaning. And what I mean by that is the apparel cash events are a nice addition, something of interest in addition to interesting activities. It isn't an interesting activity in and of itself. Now, I do believe that Massive has a roadmap for the Division 2. They know where they want to go. They know how they want to get there, but the bumps along the way, they didn't necessarily think about the impact of how each step is going to affect the player and how each step is going to affect the gameplay as a whole. So perhaps in the future you will have these expedition events that happen every 2 or 3 weeks. They show up, you can do something, and you get some sort of reward at the end, either more complicated or less complicated in order to get it. This one was pretty straightforward. You just do those expeditions and you get the reward. Possibly a future one, you may have to find the key and open the door or get access to the door in order to get the final reward at the end. Additionally, we might see an optimization station in the base, which will take your gear, whatever it happens to be, as long as it has the perks that you want, and then bring them up to the maximum as long as you have the requisite materials in order to take it from your current level up to the max level. And even if your gear is at the max level, which currently is 500, and you want to get it up to the maximum perk levels for each thing. So even though you're at 500, your armor could be higher. It has the potential to be higher. Or your weapon damage could be higher. Or armor, or depending on what perks you have on it. And what about gear sets? Gear sets are severely underwhelming currently. There are a couple gear sets that are moderately okay, but for the most part, they are not the gear sets from the Division 1. Division 1 gear sets, everyone had the gear sets or some version of the gear sets, and they were using it to the hilt. They were using it as much as possible all the time, and that just isn't the case here. Now, I can understand the developers don't want players to find one gear set and stick with it. You don't want everyone using the same Predator gear set. Everyone's bleeding and there's no diversity. So they want to maintain diversity, and I can understand that, but they also need to have a reason to use gear sets, which you currently just don't have. Lastly, the Dark Zone. There are some people that enjoy the Dark Zone as it currently is, and some people that do not. Now, the big thing about the Dark Zones is that they are smaller than the previous Dark Zone from the Division. Now, this makes engagement easier. In other words, if you are looking for a player, it is easier to find a player in the Dark Zone. So you're going to have more encounters with other players. The flip side of that is if you are being hounded by a group. If there's a group of 4 that is taking out anyone and everyone in the Dark Zone, and you're playing solo, you're going into the Dark Zone because you're looking to get a particular piece of gear at 500. It is difficult to get away from that group. That group can very easily find you within that small space, that small area called the Dark Zone, versus you trying to get away from that group. So if you're going into the Dark Zone with no interest in PvP, and there's a group of people that only want to PvP in the Dark Zone, or a mix of PvE and PvP, then you don't have a lot of recourse. The only thing that you do, the only potential recourse you have, is to leave the Dark Zone and go to one of the other 2 Dark Zones. But that is not a guarantee that you're not going to encounter the same thing in the other Dark Zones. So I don't think they've come up with a really good system for people that want to get away from those PvP heavy groups. Now you say, well, if you're not into PvP, don't go in the Dark Zone. Well, that's not necessarily the answer, because there really isn't a good method of getting 500 only gear outside of the Dark Zone. The Dark Zone was designed to be that end game for the Division and the Division 2, and in order to experience that, you have to experience some PvP. And I understand that part of it, but there's not a lot of recourse for a solo player in the Dark Zone versus a full team of 4 in the Dark Zone that is spec'd out for PvP play. If you're going into the Dark Zone and you just have a hodgepodge of gear, it's not spec'd into anything, you don't have anything min-maxed, and you've got a group of 4 where 2 or 3 of them have Eagle Bearers and they're spec'd for DPS, you don't stand much of a chance against them as a solo player, let alone in a group of 3 or 4 that also have that same kind of hodgepodge setup. So going forward, I would like to see Massive address these concerns and kind of figure out a way that the Dark Zone can be rewarding both for PvP and solo PvE players if they so choose to enjoy the Dark Zone. I think solo players have always been at a disadvantage, and making a smaller arena is putting them at a more disadvantage. So giving a solo player a little bit more of advantage in any respect in the Dark Zone would be a good thing. Something for solo players to look forward to in going to the Dark Zone instead of dreading. Well, that's it. Hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to check us out on social media, and thank you for liking, commenting, and subscribing. And we'll see you next time.
electronic device detected.
Hey, Mom. So school is fucking closed. I did all those stupid podcasts for no reason. Finals are canceled and they ordered an emergency evacuation of campus. Last night I got kicked out of the dorm and moved to another dorm because there wasn't any more room at the health center. Roomie got to stay because they still don't know what's wrong with her. It's fucking scary. There's all these rumors going around, and everyone's afraid of getting sick. And now I've got a tickle in my throat, and I'm like, is this how it starts? Are they gonna let me get in Chad's car and leave? Chad offered to drive me back home. It's kind of nice of him, but also, after that shit he tried to pull freshman year, I don't know that I want to be in a car with him for 3 days, you know? Anyway, just wanted to give you a heads up that I'm coming home and that I need pozole. Love you. Make me pozole.
Successful.
It's working. We're getting a location on the mobile shade server. Oh shit, I lost it. Keep going, I'll keep working here. I'll send you coordinates if I get a lock on the server.
Heavily armored hostiles detected.